Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf Lamed Dalid. And today's daf is dedicated in memory of Staff Sergeant Oron Shaul, whose body was returned by the IDF to Israel yesterday, and to Emily, Romy, and Doron, who were released yesterday after 471 days in captivity. Their courage is a model to us all, and we pray for the speedy return of the rest of the hostages. Very emotional day, and we hope there will be many like this. Also, thank you to Gila Fine for a fabulous series that ended yesterday. If you missed it, have no fear. It is all recorded. You can read, you can learn it. You can find the time to do the chavruta part on your own as well with a friend, by yourself. It's all organized. It's all there. Everything's on our site. So you can take the course. It's free of charge and it will be there forever. So anybody who wants to review it or wants to go learn it, it's open to you. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. So there's a study guide for today, which will help you. It's not such a confusing daf, but I did organize it in a way that just kind of helps you see the overview of the daf. There's a few charts and organizing the sugya into parts. We're going to start from the bottom of Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. Dinei Mamonot. What we're going to do today is we're going to go through a few different sections of the Mishnah. So we're up to the part in the Mishnah. If you remember, our Mishnah compares Dinei Mamonot and Dinei Nefashot. Daf Mishalahen, I believe, went up yesterday afternoon, and there's their whole discussion this week is specifically about the differences between monetary law and capital punishment, like we've been discussing. Also, the Shiur of Gefet of Rabbanit Shimoni went up yesterday, which is about the Din HaMirumeh that we learned about in Shabbos's daf. So you can go back and listen to that as well. Okay. Dinei Mamonot, we're up to Hakol Melamdim Zchuta ve'ein Hakol Melamdim Chova. Everyone in Dinei Nefashot can, we don't know who the everyone is, that's going to be our big question, because it's obviously not the judges, can be Melamed Zchut, they can come and say, oh, we have a reason to think this person should be acquitted, but ein Hakol Melamdim Chova, but not to say, oh, we think they're guilty. So the Gemara asks, Hakol, we're about 6 lines from the bottom of Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, Hakol va'afilu edim, even witnesses, even after the witnesses testify that the person's guilty, can they come back and say we think the person's innocent? That would be weird. And even if you would say so, that would follow a unique individual's opinion and would go against the majority ruling. And that doesn't make any sense. And now we're going to see there's a machlokah between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis on this issue. Titanya, as it says in a Braita. We're in a pasuk in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 35, which is all about the Rotzech B'Shgaga and Rotzech, like intentional murder versus accidental murder. How do you determine? And it says, Koma ken nefesh, anyone who murders a person, lefi edim yirtzach et harotzech, we will kill that person based on witnesses. And then it says, ve'ed echad lo yaneh b'nefesh lamut. The simple reading of that is one witness can't come to testify against someone to get them killed. Now, first of all, we know that from the beginning of the pasuk, it just said witnesses, plural. And we know that from a different pasuk, lo yakum eid echad be'ish, right? Al pi shnayim edim, al pi shnei edim yakum davar. You need 2 or 3 witnesses, not one. So what is this coming to teach you? So for that, it's open to drasha. Comes the Tanakh and says, eid echad lo yaneh b'nefesh, ben l'zchut, ben l'chova. That means one witness can't answer, meaning if a witness already testified, the witness can't come forward now with more information and say, oh, by the way, I want to, either tell you something more to say the person's guilty or say the person's innocent. Can't say anything anymore. Once you testify, that's it. You're done. Can't come in and say, oh, I have something to add. Because we suspect you that you're just adding something for some other reason. Okay? Now, we'll see this soon that perhaps we're worried if you go the opposite direction, perhaps you want to take back your testimony. Now, there's a law that's called Kevan shehigid shuv eino chazer magid. Once a witness testifies, they can't come back and testify and say the opposite of what they said or, take it back. Why is that? Because we're worried that someone's threatened them and is trying to get them to take it back. Now, that creates a bit of a problem. What kind of a problem could it create? We're going to get to this in a bit, which is, what if they lied and they want to take it back? Okay? So, in other words, first, the law, Kevan shehigid shuv eino chazer magid, is because we're worried. I mean, people always threaten witnesses and all that, and maybe they're just scared they're going to get killed. So the other side is making them be, the defendant is saying, you better take back your testimony, otherwise I'll kill you. And, we assume they're lying when they're trying to take back their testimony. But what if they lied the first time and they want to take back their testimony to avoid becoming edim zomimim, right? So That could also be a reason. So we're going to get to that soon, but these are all possible reasons why someone would try to testify after. So now they're going to say, according to the rabbis, once the witness testifies, they're done. They can't say anything more because we don't trust them anymore. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, oneh l'schut ve'ein, we don't trust when their second answer. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, oneh l'schut ve'ein oneh l'chova. We can allow them if they want to come and say something to the credit to acquit the person. We do allow it, and why is that? And we're going to see this a lot today, as we've seen before. There's this agenda always in capital crimes not to convict. We don't want to we don't want to have a case where we kill somebody because maybe there's a mistake. So if the witness testified and now all of a sudden has something to say to acquit the person, of course we're going to hear them. What if they were lying the first time? What if they, we want to hear what they have to say. So now, if we're going to say that Hakol Lamdim Zchut is specifically the witnesses or includes the witnesses, then the Mishna would only follow Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because the rabbis say we don't take anything from the witnesses. We don't yet know exactly why they hold this, but we're going to see in a minute. So to answer that question, when it says everyone, it doesn't mean the witnesses. We don't accept the testimony of the witnesses like the rabbis say, and then it's the majority opinion. But we do accept if there's students sitting there and they want to add their 2 cents, as long as their 2 cents are to acquit and not to convict, we allow it. So now we want to know what the reason is for these opinions. My time at the Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, why does he allow it? Because he says, look at the pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Where the rabbis learn this from? Lamut. Lamut is to kill the person. To convict, we won't allow the witnesses to add anything to their testimony. But to acquit, yes, we can, because the pasuk is not talking about that. Lamutu de'eno oneh, aval l'schut oneh. Okay, but they can add to l'schuto. Rabbanan, what do the rabbis say? Amarish Lakish mishum demechse kinogea be'eduto, because it looks like the witnesses are nogea be'edutam. Now, why are they nogea be'edutam? So Rashi goes back and explains what I said before, which is, since there's this principle, once you give your testimony, you can't say anything more because we're not going to trust you after that. What if you really were lying the first time? You want to protect yourself from getting huzam, from witnesses coming and saying, oh, we were with you on that day, and getting the punishment. Now, remember, when do you get the punishment? Kasher samam. If the court ruled that the person should be killed, and then witnesses came and turned you into the witnesses into edim, so maybe they're going to get the punishment that they caused the other person to get, which again, the person didn't get it yet, but they were convicted. So if you prevent the Gemardim from happening, you can prevent you becoming an Eid Zomem and getting the punishment. You'll still be an Eid Zomem, but you won't get the punishment. So basically what this person wants to do is they want to prevent the judgment from going through so that if somebody comes and knocks out the Eidim won't get the punishment of murder. So they're nogea be'edut if they want to take back their testimony. Now, they're not exactly taking back their testimony because they can't do that. So what are they going to do? They're going to just try to say, oh, we think you should exonerate for this and this reason. And they're nogea be'edut. Okay, another reason, by the way, of nogea be'edut could be they're trying to protect themselves from, maybe they're not lying the first time, they didn't lie, and they just got threats from the defendant, and they're trying to protect their lives. So we don't trust them because we think they have ulterior motives. That's another possible reason. Okay, so again, why exactly? But Rish Lakish says this looks like you're nogea be'edut, and that explains the rabbi's position. Now we have to figure out how the rabbis deal with the pasuk, because the rabbis skipped the last word. The rabbi said, but what happened to the benefesh lamut? The rabbi said you can't do it bein l'schut, bein l'chova. So hi lamut, my darshebe. What do they do with the lamut? They say, oh, that word lamut is talking about the students. Because remember, what did we say about the students? The students can say l'schut, they can't say l'chova. So now, how are we going to read this pasuk according to this? Well, luckily we have a braita that's going to explain how the rabbis read this pasuk. Kiditanya. And what they're going to do is they're going to read this pasuk, this phrase. Okay, the phrase starts with the word eid echad, and it ends with the word lamut. Okay, so I'm telling you this on purpose because follow. Ve'eid echad, and one witness, lo ya'aneh b'nefesh, can't talk against a person, lamut, to cause their death. So we're going to cut the pasuk in 2 different ways. We're going to cut off the first word for one drasha and cut off the last word for the other drasha. Or I should start with the last word. We're going to cut off first, and then we're going to cut off the first word. So let's read it. And we're going to basically say that this is talking to 2 different audiences all at once. That's our law. if one of the witnesses say, "Oh, listen, I want to say something to acquit the person, even though I already testified to convict them," we don't listen. Talmud lomar erecha lo ya'aneh, and then we stop the pasuk before lamut. Erecha can't testify, right? Can't say anything after they already testified. And that's the source for the halacha in the Mishnah. How do we know that if one of the students comes forward and says, I want to say something, I have a reason to think this person's guilty, we don't listen? Because again, we have an agenda, and there's a clear agenda. We're even going to see the Gemara is going to say we have it, the Mishnah has an agenda, which is to try to always acquit. So, right, you would have thought we have an agenda to find the truth, but really the agenda here is to try to acquit because they don't want to commit capital punishment. Okay, this will come to a crescendo when we get to the Mishnah that basically says a court that kills one in every 70 years that has a court that convicts and kills through capital punishment is considered ratzchanim. They're considered murderers. And they really, really, really don't want to kill people. Talmud Lamar, Echad lo yaneh b'nefesh lamut. Now they cut off the word aid. Aid is witness. Now we're going to say, oh, well, if you cut before the word aid, right, you cut that word and you push it separately, and then you say Echad lo yaneh b'nefesh lamut. So now instead of cutting the last word, we keep the last word in, we cut the first word, and then that's the one where it goes lamut. Only to convict, we don't allow the students to speak, but we do allow the students to speak lizchut. Okay, so we end up with this pasuk, even though, first of all, it didn't even sound like it was talking about this at all, we now take it to the world of drashot and we say, well, you can darshan this pasuk about something else because it really was unnecessary, right? We won't accept one witness to convict the person. Of course we don't. So we darshaned it now to talk about two categories of people. And again, Rabbi Meir thinks it's only talking about, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's only talking about one category of people, right? It's only talking about a witness because that was his approach. That was about a witness, can't do it to convict, but can do it lizchut. But the rabbis who think it can't go either direction, take it in two directions, one for the witness, which is either direction, and one for the students, which is only lamut, but not lizchut. Okay, moving on to the next section. Dinei nefashot hamelamed zchut eino melamed chova. If you're one of the judges and you start thinking that the person is innocent, and you in the discussions of the judges, you say, I think this person's innocent, you can't switch and say, I think the person's guilty. But the reverse direction you can do. If first you thought the person was guilty, you were giving all these reasons, you then could say, oh, but I think he's innocent. That you could do. Again, agenda being, we always want to move toward innocent and not guilty. So here comes a big halacha of Rav. Rav is going to qualify this Mishnah. And there's going to be 4 sources attempting to disprove Rav. But each time we're going to take that source and explain it according to Rav as well. So we're going to deal with this for the next while. And from there, we're going to get off on a tangent that's going to take us through to Amud Bet. Amar Rav, lo shanu ela b'shat masau matan. This idea that you can't switch from assuming the person's innocent and giving all the claims that the person's innocent, you can't switch to give claims that the person's guilty. That's when you're dealing with the masau matan, which is what we thought, right? And you're discussing, deliberating. Aval b'shak mardin melamed zchut. But when it comes to voting, when in the end, okay, let's say you thought the person was innocent, and then throughout the discussion you were convinced that they're guilty. Well, Rav says, of course you could vote that they're guilty. And we weren't talking about the vote here. It's not like you say, once you said the person's innocent, you have to vote that they're innocent. That would be strange, Rav says, even though it does seem that way from the Mishnah. Okay, the simple reading of the Mishnah is, once you think the person's innocent, you have to stick with that to the end. But he says, no, you have to stick with that during the deliberations, and you can't start trying to convince other people that the person's guilty. But when it comes to voting, if you think the person's guilty, vote that they're guilty. No problem with that. Now, like I said, we're going to bring 4 sources that seem to contradict this. Meitive, first question. L'machorat, and each time it's a tannaitic source. L'machorat mashkimim uba'im. Okay, so remember what happens. Okay, and if you don't remember, I'll remind you. In Dinei Mamonot, you start that day and you finish that day, and you're done. But in Dinei, and you can even finish at night, we'll get to that later today. But in Dinei Nefashot, if you think and you finish your deliberations and the majority of the judges want to convict, we leave it overnight. It's called halanat hadin. We wait overnight. We're hoping that as you sleep that night, you'll have, we all know lots of things keep us up at night, especially these days. And basically, we're hoping you're going to think about it well in heart and maybe change your mind. And again, agenda being we want you to move to innocent. So what do you do the next day? They get up early, they come to the court. Hamizakeh, the one who said yesterday that the person was innocent, Omer, ani hamizakeh ani bimkomi. I was the one who said yesterday the person should be innocent, and I stand in my position. Hamechayev Omer, the one who said the person was guilty, says, Ani hamechayev, I'm the one who said this yesterday, umechayev ani bimkomi, and I'm going to say that the person's guilty, like I said yesterday. Hamilamed chova. Now it continues and it says, Hamilamed chova, the ones who said the person was guilty, milamed zchut, can switch their positions today. Aval hamilamed zchut eno yachol lelamed chova. But the one who said the person's innocent cannot switch and say the person's guilty. Now, that's the end of the source. Comes the Gemara and says, what are you doing the next day if not deciding the judgment? And it says very clearly, you can't switch from innocent to guilty. To which the Gemara rejects and says, what do you mean? According to what you're saying. What? Is there no deliberation the next day? What was the whole point of sleeping on it? The point of sleeping on it was to deliberate in the morning, open the deliberations again, and hope that through the deliberations, there'll be some turning around here. So, ki katane b'shamasau matan. This source, this tannaitic source, is talking about while the deliberations were going on the next day, but not about the Gemardin when you go to vote. Of course, everyone can vote whatever they want. This wasn't talking about the vote. Okay, Tashma, second source. Danim elu keneged elu ad shir'eh echad ha'mechayvim divrei ha'mezakin. So you continue to deliberate until one of the people, again, what's your agenda? Until one of the people who obligated switches to acquit. Now, it doesn't mean, right, you have to wait until then, but it means that's the purpose of the deliberations. The purpose is to get the people who are saying guilty to switch sides. Now, in Ita, if Rabbi Yochanan's right, Rav is right, then in the end, everyone can switch sides. Then wouldn't you say the purpose of the deliberations is for anyone to switch sides, right? We open the deliberations again so that the people who, to kind of allow everyone to switch positions. And if they really could switch positions, then it should have said both. To which the Gemara says, and here we have it clearly, that the tannaitic source here has a specific agenda. What is the agenda? Tana azchut kamahader achova lo kamahader. Yes, it may be true that the people who thought yesterday they wanted to acquit now want to say the person's guilty. But that's not what we're looking for. That's not our goal. We don't want to get those people to change their mind. There's a very particular agenda. The agenda is to get to a verdict of innocent. And therefore, right, it's so fascinating, right? This is a good example of, perhaps you could say, a change from the time the Torah was written to a time, right? There's a lot of things that develop over time. And it's so clear here that they did not want to keep the Torah law of capital punishment. And they try whatever they can to get away from it. Right? The Torah all the time uses mot yumat, right? Person should get killed, it all over the place. And the rabbis are clearly trying to minimize that as best as they can. It almost sounds like ayin tachat ayin, when we turn that into mammon, it's not really eye for an eye, it's just payment. Right? They didn't want to do capital punishment. So that's why they mentioned only one direction. Yes, it could go in the other direction as well, but that's not the agenda of the tannaitic sources here. Tashma. Another source, third attempt to knock out Rav. De'amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, echad min hatalmidim shezikav hamet, if one of the students, echad min hatalmidim shezikav hamet, if you have it's really one of the judges, not one of the students, you have one of the judges there who said on the first day of the ruling, of the discussion, the deliberations, I think the person's innocent, and then died. And they're not there now to vote. Now, what would you think? What would you do? Right? You would bring a different judge to take their place. No. Fascinating. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, when you get to the vote, since already he said the first day, I think the person's innocent, we keep his vote again, saying agenda is to keep the person innocent, so we don't want to lose that vote. Keep his vote in and keep it as it was. Now, Amai, according to Rav, why would you do this? How do you know what this person would have done? Maybe they would have changed their mind. Now, it makes a lot of sense if you say you can't change your vote from innocent to guilty. That would be perfect, but that's not what Rav says. So, Rav would answer, well, They didn't change their mind yet. In other words, as long as you don't know that they changed their mind, you can assume they stood in their position. If they had said they changed their mind, then it would be something else, and then we would say guilty. But since they didn't, then, or then maybe we wouldn't know what to do. But since they didn't, we can assume they, as long as nothing changed, right? If we don't know it changed, we can actually keep their vote in and say that they said innocent. Okay, so that didn't knock out Rav. Now, one question on this before we move on. We're basically saying this source matches Rav, but they sent from Israel a letter about this source and said, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina mutsa michla Rabbeinu. You can see that Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina disagrees with our rabbi. What's our rabbi? Rav. Disagrees with Rav. And we just explained how he works with Rav. So they said, oh no, that was a mistake. Ein mutsa itmar. What they said in the letter was, he's not different from Rav. He agrees with Rav. Okay, and then that just supported the way we just read it. That was just a small aside. Back to our main thing. Fourth source, Tashma. We're now at the first day of the deliberations. There's two judges. It's two scribes of the judges that stand there. One on the right side of the room, one on the left side of the room. They write everything down. They write so-and-so thinks the person's guilty, so-and-so thinks the person's innocent, and this is why, and they write everything down. Basically transcription of the deliberations of the judges. Now, what is the purpose of this? Well, and we understand why we're writing down everybody who said guilty the first day and what the reasons were. Why? Well, if the next day, the people who thought the person was guilty, and for X reason, can't come back the next day and say, you know what, I was thinking about it overnight, and I actually think they're guilty for a different reason, and they bring a new reason, that requires another halanat hadin, another night to sit it out, because we need, right, every time you have something new and a reason to think the person's guilty, we make you sit on it, okay, and sleep on it. So therefore, we need to know what they said the first day, so that if they come the second day with the same plea, or the same right vote, but they have a different reason, that's going to require another night of sleeping on it. That's why we write the Divrei HaMachayvim. Why do we write the Divrei HaMizakim if not for Ela Divrei HaMizakim my time? Alav mishum di'ichazi tam achrina lechova lo mashkachinam behu. Is it not that we need to write down exactly who says innocent, because they can't switch their vote tomorrow? So if they switch their vote, we're not going to count it, right? If they switch to guilty, we won't let it go. Lo, right? Lo mashkachina behu means we just won't count the vote, right? It'll be like a disqualified vote, like when people put two, try to vote twice, right? Everything gets disqualified. If you do something wrong, we'll disqualify your vote. So they said, and then that would be against Rav, because Rav said you can switch your vote. Which the Gemara says, no. Now we're going to get off on a tangent about some very strange, or I don't know, difficult to understand halacha, I would say, that we want to make sure that there's no two judges here who are saying the same reason, but bringing a different verse for it. Okay, if you have one reason, you can't bring two different verses. We don't count it as two different things. You can't have shnaim omrim, right? Shnei mikraot. Okay, now, what this is exactly, we're going to see soon. We need to find, first we're going to see what's the source for this, and then we're going to see, so if two different people say the person's innocent for this and this reason, and they each bring a different verse, we're not going to count that as two different votes. And that's why we write down what everyone's reason is, to make sure that we don't have the same reason with two different verses. So where do we get this from? Minani Mile, how do we know this? Amar Abaye da Amar Kra. This is a pasuk in Tehillim. Echat diber Elohim, shtayim zu shamati ki oz Elohim. Okay, God said one thing, I heard two, because there's strength to God. Okay, this means God can do things that we can't do. Meaning, mikra achad yotzei lekama ta'amim. One pasuk in the Torah can be understood to mean different things. But ein tam achad yotzei mikama mikraot. But we can't have one law coming from different pasukim. Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, he has it from a different place. Okay, this is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, which is, God says, "Halo ko devarai ke'esh nu'um Hashem." My words are like fire, which we talk about the words of the Torah like fire, and like a patish, like a hammer that smashes a rock, right? And sparks come out of it. So now, what's this vision? What's this concept of a patish that sparks visions? So now we have מה פטיש זה מתחלק לכמה ניצוצות, אף מקרא אחד יוצא לכמה טעמים. Just like the patish creates tons of sparks, likewise, one pasuk can create lots of things. Okay, lots of laws can come out of one pasuk, but you can't have two different pasukim, one idea coming from two different pasukim. Okay, what's difficult about this is, right, besides that I saw someone wrote, like, that's what we're doing right now. We're saying, this law comes from two different pasukim, and we often do that. So to figure out exactly what they mean, we're going to try to figure it out now because they're going to bring different pasukim. But it's hard to fathom, like, what exactly, it's hard to understand exactly what they mean here, because this does seem like something that gets done. Could be they mean perhaps specifically when the judges rule, they have to be kind of in, get it from the same pasuk. And if they're getting it from two different pasukim, we're not going to count that as two votes. Again, it needs a little more in-depth analysis to understand better what's going on. Now, now we want to have an example of this. And they're going to try 3 attempts to get to an example. Each time they're going to bring something, they're going to say, here you have 2 people learning the exact same thing from these 2 psukim, these 2 different psukim, and then we're going to realize that there's actually a difference between them. Each one learns from a different pasuk because each one has a different variation on it. And then that's not the same thing. Till we get to the 3rd where we're actually going to have it. So let's see. And all of them have to do with sacrifices. So we're getting into Zvachim now. Right? Masechet Zvachim. Amar Rav Zvid, Keditnan, like it says in the Mishna. Mizbeach mikadesha tara oila. The altar sanctifies anything that goes on the altar that could go on the altar, okay, like could be burned on the altar, but let's say it's disqualified for some reason. If you bring it on the altar, even just on the ramp of the altar, it becomes sanctified, and that means you can't take it off the altar. You have to burn it, okay, on the altar. So, Mizbeach Mikadesh et ha'ra'oila. Now, this is only if it's an object that normally goes on the altar. If it's not an object that goes on the altar, like it's milk, which you don't bring on the altar, then it wouldn't work. But if you put oil, which, people would pour oil libations on the altar, and the oil became disqualified, it would have to be poured on the altar. Okay? So, Rabbi Yeshua Omer. Now we're going to have this machlok between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel. Call it, like, where we get this from. Kol ha'ra'oi ishim. Anything that could be burned on the altar, imala lo yered. If you put it on there, it doesn't go down. Shenema ha'oleh al mokdah, because ha'olah al mokdah, the olah goes on the moked. The moked is where the fire is. Ma olah shiru yali shim, just like the olah is something that you burn, the burnt offering. So imatal lo tered, if it went on the altar, you don't bring it down. At kol shu ra'oi shim imala lo yered. Anything else, and this pasuk is telling you, the korban olah, once it went on the moked, on the place where the fire is, on the mizbech, we don't take it off. So anything else that could be burned on the altar and then gets disqualified, gets burned on the altar anyway. Right? Imala lo yered means we don't take it off the altar. Rabban Gamliel Omer, kol ha'ra'oi lemizbech, imala lo yered. Anything that could go on the altar, if it went up, it doesn't go down. Shenema He ha'olah mukdah ala mizbech. Now he's not focused on the mukdah, the burn it where it gets burnt. His focus is on the mizbech. Now it happens to be it's the same pasuk, but it's different words in the same pasuk. So now he says from there, ma olah shiru ya legabe mizbech, just like the olah can go on the altar instead of can be burned on the altar, but can go on the altar. Therefore, right, im ala lo yireh, once it goes up, it doesn't come down. Shneimar, right, im al lo tired, av kol shu ra'oi lemizbech, im ala lo tired. And what's the idea here? How do we know they're both learning the same thing? Because travayu, my kamarabi, psulim. They're trying to include anything that's disqualified. Anything that got impure, let's say, and you brought it on the altar anyway, gets burned on the altar. So now, right, mar ma'itelemi mukdah, mar ma'itelemi mizbech, and they each learn it from a different word in the pasuk. But the Gemara says, but what are you talking about? You didn't pay attention. Ha-tam miflag plige. They actually have a debate. They're each learning from a different word because they're each learning something different. I mentioned oil as an example. It's a good example because oil goes on the altar, but it doesn't get burned on the altar. And notice Rabbi Yeshua said only things that get burned on the altar. Tikatane Seifa, the end of that Mishna says, Ein bein divrei Rabban Gamliel divrei Rabbi Yeshua ela hadam v'nisachim. The nisachim, like the wine libations, the oil libations, and the blood that gets poured on the altar, those don't get burned. They get poured on the altar. So they are what we call ra'oi lemizbach. If you learn it from the word mizbach, they would be in. If you put them on, you couldn't take them down, even if they were disqualified. But if you learn it from the moked, then it's only things that get burned on the altar, and those don't get burned on the altar. So if you put oil on, it was disqualified oil, you would take it down. So Rabban Gamliel Omer lo yerdu, Rabbi Yeshua Omer yerdu. Okay? So that's what we would have. So therefore, that's not two things that are learned. That's not one halacha that's learned from two different verses because it's two different halachot. Ela Amar of Papa, second attempt. Kidditanya. It says in the following brighter. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, turning out on the bed. Mitoch shene'amar kol hanogeh b'mizbeach yikdash. Now this is the same idea. Anything that touches the altar will be sanctified. Shomea ani ben ra'oi ben she'eno ra'oi. Now here it says anything that touches the altar is sanctified. So that sounds like even things that don't, like milk. I bring milk on the altar, it should be sanctified. So obviously that's not the case. Talmud Lamar, how do you know that? Well, it says, and now we're quoting a totally different pasuk. This is what you should put on the altar. Seems very clear, right? This is what goes on the altar. Kvasim b'nei shana, shnaim liyom tamid. Okay? Two kvasim that are a year old, right? 2 a day. Now, we're going to learn here from kvasim. Ma kvasim ru'uyim, af kol ru'uy. It says this is what goes on the altar. So now we're going to say, whatever goes on the altar that could go on the altar, like a keves, which could be offered, right, which could be offered as a sacrifice. So likewise, anything else that could go as a sacrifice. But Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ola, ma ola ru'ya av kol ra'ui. He quotes a different pasuk in that same chapter, in chapter 29 of Shemot. Ola, a few pasukim later, Ola tamid l'dorotechem petach ol moed. Okay, you bring the Ola to the petach, to the entrance of ol moed. It goes on the altar. So just like the Ola, the korban olah, the burnt offering, is ru'ya av kol ra'ui. Okay, this is the same thing from two psukim, because we have either you learn from the animal that goes on, or you learn it from the fact that it says the burnt offering. Okay, both of those are kol ra'ui. Travayu makamimate psule. Okay, and what are they trying to include? Right, it's psulim. In other words, they're trying to say even disqualified things. Mar ma'itelem mikvasim, umar ma'itelem mi'olah. Right, and they're each saying. I just want to check one thing. Second. Right. Okay, sorry. That's what it is. They're each trying to not include things that are not psulim. Here doesn't mean like we talked psulim in the previous. Psulim here means things like milk that don't go on the altar at all. Okay, they're trying to disqualify, and they're saying what's not included here are things that are not like animals or the burnt offering. Okay, but they basically seem to be saying the same thing. But now they come and they say, no. There's a difference between them. What is that? Oh, so sorry. I didn't finish reading there. They're each mamate psulim marmaitelemi kvasim marmaitelemi ola. And they're each just learning it from a different word. V'hamar, that would be a good example. But now they say, no, it's not a good example because hamar of adabar ava olata of psula ikabenayu. You could have a burnt offering of a bird. Now, if you have a burnt offering of a bird that's disqualified, that would be a difference between them. My tilami kvasim, kvasim in avalolata of lo. Now, then you would say, if you learn it from kvasim, that's specifically lambs, sheep, those kind of animals, but not, right, and all in that category, but not birds. And then you would say birds, no, it's, right, it would be out here. Uman demaitelemi ola afilu olata of nami. Okay, in other words, that would mean that Ola Ha'of would not be sanctified, right? And the other one would learn it from Ola, which would say if it's an Ola, it's a burnt offering. Burnt offering includes even bird burnt offerings. So then this halacha would be true as well for the korban, for the Ola Ha'of. So that means that they're each learning from different pasuk because each one is learning different criteria, right? Is the bird in or is the bird out? Okay, so that didn't work. Third and final option, which will work. Ela Amarav Ashi Kiditanya. Dam yechashev la'ishahu, dam shafach. Okay, now we're moving to a different topic about sacrifices. If you you take a sacrifice, you slaughter it and sprinkle the blood outside, or do one or the other. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And you do it outside the temple, you get karet. Okay, it's forbidden. That means if you do it accidentally and you didn't realize it was forbidden, then you bring a sacrifice. So what does it say there when it talks about it in the pasuk? Okay, we're going to quote some different pasukim about this. This is in Vayikra Yud Zayin. It says, if you didn't bring it to Petach Ol Moed and you did it outside the temple, it is like blood. It is like you spill blood. Now notice this repetition in that word. It's blood. It's like you spill blood, right? Spilling blood, meaning it means like you murdered someone, which is a little bit extreme because you brought a sacrifice outside the temple, but it's saying it's very serious. L'rabota tazorek, divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Why does it say dam twice? To say even one who sprinkles blood and not just sacrifices, because the real context of the pasuk is slaughtering the animal. So they say not just slaughtering, even if you sprinkle the blood. Rabbi Akiva Omer, O zavach lirabot etazorek. He quotes a pasuk a few psukim later, which says, Elehen Omar ish ish mibe Israel. Okay, anyone who does this, asher ya'aleh ola uzavach, who brings either an ola or a zavach. A zavach is a sacrifice. So why didn't he say ola or zavach? It must be to include lirabot etazorek. So what do you see here? Travay omai kamarabe zrika. Both of them learn that sprinkling the blood on an altar outside the temple, you get karet as well. And that's our example, and that's going to work. Gemara is going to suggest difficulty, but we'll reject the difficulty. What if you both slaughtered and sprinkled the blood? That's a difference between the two of them. Why? Because the pasuk that talks about the slaughtering also mentions the blood, and since we learn about the blood from that pasuk, it's all one pasuk. So let's say you didn't know it was forbidden. You did both actions. You would only bring one sacrifice because it's all part of one lo taseh. But the one who learns it from the divrei Rabbi Akiva chayav shtayim, because one is from one lo taseh and the other is from another lo taseh. So there's two negative commandments, one where we learn about slaughtering and one where we learn about blood. And therefore, if you didn't know either was forbidden and you did them both, you would have to bring two sacrifices. But the Gemara, and therefore it sounds like they're two different things because there's a practical difference between them. They say, no. Ha'itmar ala amar Abaye, af v'divrei Rabbi Akiva nami eno chayav elecha. No, Abaye says, even Rabbi Akiva thinks you're only obligated one korban. Don't think. Now, theoretically, you could have said that because he learns one from one pasuk, one from the other. But there's a different pasuk in a totally different place in Devarim chapter 12, where it talks about what if you want to eat regular meat. Like in those days, it was kind of all the meat was sacrificial meat. And they say, well, if you want to eat regular meat, you can eat it, you can slaughter it outside the temple. But if it's a sacrifice, it has to be brought to the temple. So it talks about shchutei chutz again, the same idea of slaughtering outside the temple. And the pasuk there says, when it says the sacrifice has to be brought in the right place, right, in the temple, it says, sham ta'aleh olotecha v'sham ta'aseh. That's where you're going to bring your ola offerings, your burnt offerings, and that's where you're going to do it. Now, why Shamta says just to be unnecessary. Arvinu Rahmana lekulu asiyot. But they say there is all the actions you do are like one, which means if you slaughter, if you sprinkle the blood, and you do all those things, what we call behelem echad, without knowing any of that was forbidden, you're only going to bring one because it says Shamta says if all the asiyot are like one. Okay, so any actions associated with that only get you one karet obligation, which means one sacrifice if you did it unwittingly. Okay, that was all a total aside. We got to there because of the fourth difficulty with Rav. If you remember what we did so far today, we started with Dinei Mamonot, and we said, right, Milamdim, everyone could be Milamed Zchut, who is Hakol. In the end, we said it's not the Eidim according to the Mishnah. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi would say yes, but our Mishnah, no. And our Mishnah follows the rabbis, say it would be the students. And then, because according to the rabbis, you can't even be Milamed Zchut. And then we got to Dinei Nefashot. You can be Melamed Zchut. If you're Melamed Zchut, you can't switch to Chovah. Rav said that's only in the deliberations, but not in the final psak. And from there, we have four difficulties against Rav. We resolved them all. And in the fourth resolution, we got to this issue. And then we got off on a tangent about this issue. And now we're back to the Mishnah. Dinei Mamonot danim biyom and not balayla. Okay, Dinei Mamonot we do it during the day. But I'm sorry, vigomrim balayla. We can finish them at night. Whereas Dinei Nefashot can't be done at night at all. So now we want to know, where do we get this? So I'm going to skip the siman. It says in the psukim, right, you can judge. This is from Shmot Yud when Yitro comes. He says they'll judge the people all at all times. Sounds like even at night. Well, then you should be able to start the judgment at night if that's the case. Well, Rava said, Rava Rami, he brought a contradiction between two psukim. And on the day you give nachala to your children. Now there, it's also judgment, because there it talks about it'll be like a din. There's a pasuk there we'll see later today about calling it mishpat. Ha-ketzad. So how do we deal with this? One says b'chol eid and one says in the day. So Yom Tchila Ladin, Laila Gemar Din. So Yom is where you start the judgment, but you can finish it at night. And he gets it from those two psukim. Okay, we could have stopped here, but now the Gemara says, Matnitin deloke Rabbi Meir. You should just know there's a dissenting opinion here. Our Mishnah doesn't follow Rabbi Meir's position. Rabbi Meir thinks you can only do judgments of Dinei Mamonot during the day, not just starting them, also finishing them. Titanya, Haya, and then later we're going to get back to what does he do with those two psukim then? What does it say? B'chol 8. How do you handle that? So Haya Rabbi Meir Omer, Ma Talmud Lomar. How does he get this? Because he says, what does it say? What's the meaning of this pasuk? Al pihem, which is relating to the court. Yiyeh kol riv v'chol nega. Okay, this is a pasuk in Dvarim, which talks about the court. It says they will rule on all fights with people, which is monetary law, and kol nega, on leprous issues. Now, what do these two things have anything to do with each other? Ela makish rivim lenegaim, and so we're going to say makish negaim lerivim. We're going to learn from one to the other. Okay, ma negaim bayom negaim. When you have leprous marks, the Kohen can only look at them during the day. Dichtiv ubiyom heraotbo, and on the day you show it to the Kohen, it can only be seen during the day, and this is also logical. So he has to see. Can't see color, right? He has to see the exact color. Can't see color if it's dark out. Af rivim. Remember, in those days there was no lights at night. Af rivim bayom. Also, rivim would be during the day. And that's his proof. We could stop right here. Okay, that's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, because we learned it from Niga'im are during the day. Oh, Din and Momono can only be done during the day. You can't finish them at night, and that goes against our Mishna. Uman other laws he learns. Maniga'im shalo besumim. You can't have a blind Kohen look at a nega, obviously. Dichtiv l'choma einei Kohen, because the Kohen has to look at it. Afrivim shalo besumim. Also, judgment can't be done with blind judges. Umakish nigaim l'rivim, ma'rivim. Okay, which by the way also makes sense. You have to see the person's face to see if people are lying. It's one of the things, right? You can really sense people. You can hear, you can see that they're lying. Okay, maybe you could say the blind people can compensate and hear more, hear better in terms of whether someone's lying. But there's something about seeing the faces of the people testifying, or the people who are being judged who don't even speak, right? And you could see their faces and learn a lot from that. Umakish nigaim l'rivim. Now we're going to do the reverse. We're going to learn from the judgments to the leprosy. Ma rivim shalo b'krovim. Af nigaim shalo b'krovim. Go back to our krovim. So your relatives can't judge you. Also, relatives can. If you have a relative who's Kohen, they can't look at your leprous mark. Too bad, right? That would be convenient. Wait a minute. If you're making all these comparisons, then you might say, just like you need 3 judges for Dina Momono, you need 3 judges, 3 Kohanim to look at your nega. Well, Vidinu, and it would be logical. If your money is with 3, all the more so your body, we should be judging you with 3, because we take your body more seriously. You take your body more seriously than your money. But Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "Vuval Aaron Kohen o el chad Kohanim." It says one of the Kohanim. From here, you see even one Kohen can look at your nega. Okay, now we're going to have a story. So we learned, now we're getting off on a tangent about blind judges. There was someone blind. It's unclear whether he was blind in 1 eye or blind in 2 eyes, okay? There's some ramifications, but I'm just going to tell you the commentaries differ on this. I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs, why we would use one over the other, but you'll see in a minute they're going to talk about blind in 1 eye, and maybe that's why they think that. So there was a judge who was blind in the neighborhood of Rabbi Yochanan, Dahava Daim Dina, and he would judge. And Rabbi Yochanan didn't say, what are you doing? You can't be a judge. You're blind. Okay? Strange. How did he do that? Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, halakha kastam Mishna? Rabbi Yochanan in general was known to say, we paskin like a stam Mishna. And what does our Mishnah say? Utnan kol kasher, a different Mishnah says, this is a Mishnah in Nida, I believe. Kol kasher ladun, kasher laha'id. Anyone who can judge can also be a witness. But yesha kasher laha'id ve'en kasher ladun. There are people who can testify and can't judge. Like, for example, and Rabbi Yochanan himself said, when he explained this Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan la tu yesuma be'echad me'enav. Even a summa who's blind in 1 eye, he's a good example. He's someone who can't judge but can testify. So he explained the Mishnah that way, and we know that Rabbi Yochanan holds halakha like a regular Mishnah that's an unattributed, no machloket about it. We paskin that way. So how does he do this? How did he do that? Rabbi Yochanan stam achrita eshkach. Oh, he found a different stam Mishnah, and he held by that one. Dine mamonot and biyam v'gomrim balayla. If you can finish the judgment at night, where you have partial vision or maybe even barely any vision because it's dark out, right? They didn't have night vision glasses in those days, and even with candles, you can't really see so well. So you see that it doesn't really matter if you can see or not. So now they say, okay, we have that stam Mishnah, we have this stam Mishnah. That's how we explain Rabbi Yochanan why he didn't stop that judge. But my only the high stama, my high stama. Why would you choose this one over that one? So they're going to give 2 reasons. This represents the majority opinion because we saw they differ with Rabbi Meir. So this is the majority opinion. Maybe that's why. There's a more compelling one. This is in the laws of Batei Mishpat. When it talks about all the laws of judgment, we're in Sanhedrin. If you're going to choose between Sanhedrin and Nida, where are you going to learn your laws for the courts? You're going to take it from Sanhedrin. Rabbi Meir. Now we go back to Rabbi Meir. So that was all to say. What was Rabbi Meir's opinion? From there, we got off on this tangent about the blind because that's what he was talking about the Negaim. Now we go back to Rabbi Meir and we say, how does he view these psukim? And for this, I put a chart on the study guide. What did he do with this? Because that was where the rabbis learned you can do it at night. To say you could judge even on a cloudy day. Okay, on a cloudy day, you can't see so well, again, without lights inside. Titnan. Well, why does he have to tell us an extra pasuk to include this? Why wouldn't it be obvious? Well, remember, we learn it from leprosy. And what does it say about leprosy? Titnan. Not very early in the morning and not late in the day. Like that's, I say it's the hardest time to drive in dawn and dusk. It's very hard to see. Not in your house, right? Because the house doesn't have sunlight coming in. On a cloudy day, dull lights look bright. Okay, not late in the day because things that are bright look dull. Rabbi Meir, okay, so that's what he gets b'chol 8, even on a cloudy day. What about for Rabbi Meir? And for this, we're going to re-quote an entire sugya we saw in Bava Batra, so it might sound familiar. And with that, we're going to finish for today. What does he do with biyom and chilot banav? He uses it for the following brayta, which says like this. Rabbi Bar Chanina, Keditani Rabbi Bar Chanina Kameja Rav Nachman. So Rabbi Bar Chanina bought this brayta in front of Rav Nachman and said, "Vaya biyom and chilot banav, biyom tamapil nechalot, v'yet tamapil nechalot alayla." You can pass on inheritance during the day. You can't do it at night. To which Rav Nachman responded and said, you might remember this because it's kind of a funny question. He said, Amar le, elameata. According to what you're saying, are you saying you can only pass on a chala if you die during the day, and if you die at night, your children can't inherit? So, like, I don't know what the percentages are, how many people die a day, how many people die at night, let's say 50-50. So 50% of the population can't pass on their inheritance to their children because they happen to just die at night. That would be ridiculous. So Rav Nachman, who asked this question, kind of suggests, could it be this is what you mean? And in the end, he's going to say, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. So, Dilma din nachalot kamar. Maybe you meant this law of nachalot, which we're going to explain right now. Detanya, I told you later, we're going to see. It says about nachala that it's a mishpat. It's a law. Now, this sounds like a judgment. What does that mean? Or akol parsha kula liot din. This whole parsha is meant to be din. What does this mean? Kid Rav Yehuda Amarav, like Rav Yehuda Amarav, the Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav, shlosha shenichnesu levaker et hacholeh, ratzu kotvim, ratzu osim din. If 3 people go into visit a sick person, if they want, they could write it down and they could be the judges. So if somebody says, I want to give this to the son, this to that child, this to that, it's like a done deal. They never have to go to court because it's as if there was a court because there were 3 people there. But shnayim, if it was in front of 2 people, because 2 people can't be like a beitin. The Amar of Chista, here comes the big thing, lo shanu ela bayom. That can only be at night, during the day, because din can only be done, beitin can only sit during the day. If you do it at night, though, in front of 3 people, they could write it down, but they can't be the judges. Why not? Because they only function like witnesses because they can't judge at night. So if they heard it at night, then ein eid naseh dayan. We already learned that a witness can't become a judge in the same case that they're witnesses of. And Amar le, right? And that must be what you mean. B'yom and chilot banav means you can only do the 3 people who are listening can function like a beitin only if it was done in front of them during the day, not if it was said in front of them at night. Is that what you meant? And Amar le'in, and that's what was his name? Rabbi Bar Chanina said, yes, that's what I meant. Hachi kamin. That is exactly what I said. Okay, so we already reviewed the first part of the daf about melamdim zchut and nachovah, about melamed zchut, right? Can't switch to chovah. The judges can't switch to the other side. Rav, who said, well, they can't actually vote otherwise, and we had a whole diun about him. And then we finished with this thing about danim b'yom and finish at night. Finish at night is only the rabbis, not Rabbi Meir, and we showed where each one learns from the psukim, how he deals with the psukim of the others. And now we're going to finish for today, wishing everyone a good day. And as I said earlier, may the hostages be released quickly, and wishing everyone a good day.